Everyone, let's take a look at how we can use graphs to evaluate functions. All right, so right here we have a graph of two functions. There's the function g of x, which is this sort of bluish curve, and we have the function f of x, which is this kind of pinkish purplish line. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can use these functions to how we can use these graphs to evaluate these two functions. First of all, let's remember, as always, the values of x, those being the inputs, are listed on the x-axis. That's the left to right horizontal axis. And the outputs of the functions, the values of g of x or f of x, are listed on the horizontal axis. Are listed on the vertical axis. That's the axis that goes up and down. Okay, so let's say we were asked something like, what is the value of g of 2? So what is the value of g of 2? Well, remember what this means. What g of 2 means is what is the value of the function g when you input the value 2, right? So first, we have to look to find the value 2 on the x-axis. It's not all labeled, but since this is labeled 5, we can count x equals 0, x equals 1, and x equals 2 right here. Okay, so how do we find what the corresponding value of the function g is at this value of x? Okay, well, remember that the value of g of x at any given value of x is listed on the y-axis for that corresponding input of x. Here's what I mean by that. We have our input on the x-axis, right? So from that point, we want to look either up, or straight down to see if we can find where the output of the function g of x, which is graphed, occurs at that point x. So we're just going to look up, okay, and we're going to see the output of g of 2 is right there. That's where the graph g of x line lies at that value of x. So now to find out what the value of the graph is at that point, we go either to the left or right, in this case to the left, and see what value it hits the y-axis at. Here, it also hits the y-axis at the value 2, right? So an input of x equals 2 into the function g of x gives us the output also of positive 2. So g of 2 equals 2 in this case. What if we were asked now to find the value f of 0? All right, the value f of 0. Remember, that means what is the output of the function f when you input the value 0? Okay, so we're going to go try to find the value x equals 0 on the x-axis. That's going to occur right here, right? So now to find out what value the function f of x has at x equals 0, we're going to look either straight up or straight down. In this case, straight up until we find where the graph representing f of x lies. So what is the corresponding value on the y-axis at that point? That's the value y equals 1, right? So when we plug in x equals 0 to the function f, the output is positive 1. How about f of 2? What is the value f of 2? Well, we're going to complete the same process, right? We want to find out what is the value of the function f at the x value, x equals 2. So we are going to find x equals 2 on the x-axis. That's right here, all right? So now we're going to look either straight up or straight down from this x value to see where the function representing f is graphed at this point. It's graphed right here, right? So what is the value of f of x equals 2? We're going to have to sort of estimate this one, right? Let's see. So now that we're at the point of the function f of 2, we have to look to the left or right, in this case to the left, and see where that point corresponds to on the y value, because that's what where that point corresponds to on the y-axis, because that's what represents the output of the function f of x at x equals 2. And let's estimate that at about 4.8, right? It's going to be a little less than 5, but it's going to be on the high range of less than 5. So a decent estimate for this graph is 4.8. What if we were asked a somewhat more difficult question? What if we were asked, what is the value of x such that g of x is equal to -2, okay? What is the value of x such that g of x is equal to -2? Let's remember what this means. This means that we want to find where the value of g of x is equal to -2, right? That means where is the output of the function g equal to -2? So let's find the value -2 on the y-axis, right? Because it's the y-axis where the values or outputs of the functions are listed. So let's find -2 on the y-axis. That's right here. So now where to find what values of x correspond to that output? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to mark out our position on the y-axis, and we're going to look to the left and to the right, okay, and see where that value occurs on the function g, okay? So at this point here, this is the point on g of x that has a y-coordinate of -2, which means it's the point that has an output value of -2. This point on the function g of x, or on the graph of g of x, also has a y-coordinate of -2 right here, right? Which means it has an output of -2. So let's look up from there to see what is the x-coordinate of this point. What is the x-coordinate of this point, and what's the x-coordinate of this point, right? So right here, this x-coordinate is +1, and this x-coordinate is -2, okay? So we see that the input, x equals -1, corresponds to an output of -2 for the function g of x. And we see here that the input, x equals -2, also corresponds to an output of -2 in the function g of x. So we know that g of 1 equals -2. We know that also g of -2 equals -2. So as an answer to our question, what are the x values such that g of x equals -2? Those x values are +1 and -2. Okay, what if we were asked, what value of x satisfies the condition f of x equals -1? Okay, what value of x satisfies the condition f of x equals -1? Again, we can think of that as meaning what is the input that causes an output of -1 in the function f, or we can also think of it on the graph of f of x, on f of x graph, what is the x-coordinate? What is the x-coordinate when the y-coordinate is -1, right? These are equivalent questions because what f of x equals -1 means is that's a point on the graph f of x where the output is -1. And remember, the outputs are graphed on the y-axis. So f of x equals -1 means there's a point on the graph f of x where the y-coordinate is -1. All right, let's make some room here. Let's make some room here and try to work through this. Let me try to rewrite this here, right? We are talking about when f of x equals -1. All right, so remember that the values of the function, the outputs, are listed on the y-axis. So let's find the value -1 on the y-axis. Okay, that's right here, right? This is the value f of x equals -1. So what is the x value that corresponds to that output on the function f of x? Okay, so to find out what is the point on f of x that has the output -1, we're going to look either to the left or to the right. In this case, to the left, and see at what point does the function f of x occur at y equals -1. That point is right here. So now to find what the corresponding x-coordinate or x value of the function is at that point, we're going to look either straight up or straight down, in this case straight up to the x-axis to find what the x value is at this point. And that x value is actually also, in this case, -1, right? So what value of x satisfies the condition f of x equals -1? That value is x equals -1. This also means that the input, x equals -1, the function f causes it to produce an output of f of x equals -1. And it also means that on this graph, there is a point -1, -1 for the graph f of x.